summer to help people all over Brookline to get all their questions answered about putting solar on their homes and businesses. And, but the important part tonight here is that we have, we're very lucky to have folks here from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center who will actually make a presentation and take questions about the Solarize Mass program. But before I introduce them, let me also mention that we have a couple people here who already, we have more than a couple, I've actually talked to other people too, but we have two official people who have name tags on who already have solar installed on their homes. I wanted to mention them to you. One is Blake Cady, he's there, raise your hand, Blake. And the other is Rob Weinstein, over here. I just want to mention that because at the end we're going to take questions, but we'll all stay around and answer any questions we can, but in particular you may be interested in talking to one or both of them about their experience. We also, I haven't seen, we think later tonight we'll have two other town officials here too. Carol Bruton, who is the acting planning director, I think she's tied up in the meeting, and but she's been very, very supportive of this program, as has the whole planning department. So may get a chance to talk with her, but even more important perhaps, just because of what he does, is Dan Bennett, who is the building commissioner. He's right now at a selectmen's meeting, but hoping to come later. And of course, it's his department that issues permits and everything, including solar. So it's great to have him supporting this and here to answer questions and talk to people too. The solar team itself consists of three people: myself and Keske, who's back there with a yellow shirt. We're just local residents who have gotten some training in being solar coaches. As I say, we'll try to answer what questions we can, and we'll pass other ones on to people who know more than us. And the third member of the team is Laura Curtis Hayes, who's a senior planner of the planning department. And I'll let her say a few words.
Hi everyone, thanks Warner. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura Curtis Hayes. I work in the planning department on a number of different things, but a good portion of my time is spent on working on energy and sustainability issues for the town. I'm really glad to be here and see everyone. And I think we're all looking forward to learning a lot more about small-scale solar development from the Mass CEC. Brookline has always tried to be a leader on environmental issues, and for the past 10 years, the Board of Selectmen, the Town Climate Action Committee, the Planning Department, and other town departments have really started to focus on energy issues. We've worked really closely with local citizens groups like Climate Action Brookline, the Brookline Green Space Alliance, and we've done everything from purchasing hybrid cars to improving the energy efficiency of municipal buildings, and to even starting a home energy program called Green Homes Brookline. So solar is really kind of the next step for us. We have solar installations on the health department building as well as Putterham Library, and we're looking to put solar on other town buildings as we speak. We're kind of working on that right now. So what I'm really excited about though is the Solarize Mass program, because it's really for residents and businesses. And I think it's a really great opportunity for Brookline. So I'm glad you all are here. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you as we kind of get this program off the ground.
All right, well, now as I say, again, we're very lucky to have people from the CEC here. I'm going to tell you who they are. First of all, Elizabeth Youngblood is Brookline's primary contact for this program. She majored in biology and international relations in Mount Holyoke and worked for several years in pharmaceutical research before she moved over to the green world. And there she worked in operations for the largest New England solar installer, which is Alteris Renewables. And she's been managing solar programs now. After that, she's been managing programs at the CEC since 2011. And so she's always on call for us and helping us things, and at the same time she's also getting her master's degree in environmental management. The other person you'll hear from is Elizabeth Kennedy, who began began working in environmental finance with a company called Evergreen Investment Management in Boston. And she came to the CEC in 2007, and she's managed several different programs there, but most recently, 3 years ago, she launched this Solarize Mass program. She's now the director of solar programs at the CEC, where she manages an annual solar budget for solar initiative, solar incentive programs of about $20 million. And she has a BA in environmental studies from Connecticut College and an MBA from BU. So we have two people that can tell you all about this and answer some questions, and I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Warner. Thank you, everybody, for coming in tonight. We really appreciate it. I'm Elizabeth, number 1. We're very excited to be here tonight in Brookline to talk about Solarize Mass and, thank you, give the Solar 101 presentation. So the agenda for the evening, I plan to speak about the solar PV basics and actually just turn it over to Elizabeth Kennedy. But first I wanted to set the stage and tell you a little bit about the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. We're a quasi-public state agency, and our primary goal is driving the solar and energy, the market in Massachusetts. We have a number of different programs, including Solarize Mass, and so this is actually our 3rd year of partnering with communities to run this program, and we're very excited. So in Massachusetts, we use a lot of energy, on average about $22 billion a year, and most of that actually leaves the state. It goes to Canada, it goes to the Gulf, it also goes to the Middle East. A program like Solarize Massachusetts is a good opportunity to bring a lot of those dollars and keep them local in Massachusetts, both through using local energy sources on rooftops, having local installers install solar PV, as well as saving residents a lot of money, and therefore having that money be spent locally as well. So what is solar PV? Solar photovoltaics, also known as solar electricity. Here are a few examples. I've got 2 roof-mounted systems, and one in the middle is a ground-mounted system for people who have a lot of front or backyard space. This picture is actually a little bit religious. It's not meant to be. It's just to say that there's a lot of sun that hits the Earth every year. Every 88 minutes, enough sunlight reaches the Earth's surface to power the world for a year. Every 112 minutes, there's more sunlight that reaches the Earth's surface than is stored in all the proven oil, coal, and natural gas resources in the world. So what's another way of looking at this? Right there you see the total amount of energy that's consumed in the world. It's 16 terawatt years per year. It's pretty large. And what you see down here are the total non-renewable sources in the world. This is the total amount. And these are slides from Richard Perez, who is from the University of Albany, New York. Excellent. So we've got oil reserves, we've got uranium, plutonium, natural gas, and as well, annually we have wind, biomass, hydro, and, shoot, I always forget the OTEC. Isn't that the wave power, I believe? Well, anyway, annual. And then you have that as well, and solar. It's pretty large. 23,000 terawatt years of energy per year hitting the world. What about the United States and what about Massachusetts? Is there enough sun to go solar in our state? From looking at this map, you can see that we might not be the bright red zone of the southwest, but we're actually right in the middle when it comes to solar radiation. You can see us, we're in that green area there. So you're saying, okay, that looks green in the middle, that's fine. If you look at the nation kind of to the bottom right, that is Germany, and they have a solar resource that's actually lower than any state in the United States, including Alaska. And they're one of the countries that installs the most solar in the world. So if solar can be installed there, it can be installed here as well and be a good value proposition. Massachusetts also has very high electricity prices. We're actually 10th in the nation. We're at the end of the energy pipeline. We don't have a lot of coal-fired power plants here. We import a lot of our gas resources, and so we have very high electricity rates. What the graph to the lower right shows is that over time we've seen electricity rates steadily growing. There have been some plateaus with fracking and natural gas becoming less expensive, but over time with transmission costs going up, we do see generally a steady increase in the cost of energy going up from the utilities. So what's the trend with solar PV or solar photovoltaics? This is a graph that looks at both the cost of going solar, looking at a cost per watt, as well as the adoption rates in Massachusetts. And what you see here is that the cost of going solar has been dropping over the past several years. When I started getting into solar back in, 3 years ago, it was, $7 a watt, $6 a watt. And even, 2003, 2004, it was $9 or $10 a watt. And now it's around $5 a watt. So it is dropping consistently. And what you see here actually is that adoption rates have been going up. So, which is excellent to see. And we've been seeing a lot of economies of scale, and it's very exciting. It generally means more rebate applications for us to review because more people are going solar, but that's fine. We can deal with that. This is another way to look at it. This is 2006. The little yellow dots are solar PV installations in the state. And then this is 2013. So the adoption rates have definitely been going up all throughout Massachusetts. So how does solar PV work? I think the thing to be aware of is that it needs direct sunlight and a lot of sunlight. For solar PV to work, it needs solar photons to hit the panels and cause a current to occur, that then goes into a, what's actually the next slide, an inverter. But anyway, direct sunlight is necessary, and you'll see if there isn't sun, then it won't work. So, something to be aware of. So here's not a home that I would live in, but a home perhaps in Massachusetts. You see the solar PV panels on the roof. They're generating electricity in direct current. That electricity then goes into what's called an inverter, which changes the electricity from direct current to alternating current. Then the electricity goes into a panel, which then goes into your home. And what you see here in this interactive diagram is that as electricity is being used in your home and there's a load in your home, the electricity is being consumed on site. However, if you're gone during the middle of the day and your solar PV system is generating lots of electricity, we have in Massachusetts what's called net metering. And what that means is that any excess electricity that is not being used at the home will actually go through what's called a net meter and go back onto the utility. And what net metering does is the utility, in a sense, turns into a battery, sort of a bank for your electricity. The electricity goes out onto the utility grid, and at night when the solar PV system isn't working, or maybe in the middle of the winter time when you're using a lot of electricity but there might not be as much sun, you can pull that electricity or those credits that you get from the utility and use it in the future. So in that way, it becomes kind of like a bank. Something to note here. Sometimes we get the question, well, is this a really good technology to use when the grid is down as a storm ride-through technology? And something to be aware of is if you don't have batteries in your home, the solar PV system will not work. That's something that utility requires to stop what would be called an islanding effect. So they don't want a situation where the solar PV system is generating lots of electricity, not being consumed on site, and then the electricity goes back onto the grid when there might be workers on the grid or working on it and they might get electrocuted. So I just want to make the point that you need to get batteries in order to have that to work. So generally speaking, we don't see it as a storm ride-through technology. Oftentimes people will buy a generator. So this is an electric bill from a colleague of ours. Something to see here, the blue lines are basically consumption and generation. So any line that's above the 0 is a net consumption for that time period, and anything below the line is a net, basically storing of energy onto the grid. So what the red line is the total net of that, the cumulative electricity. So what you see here for the most part is that this system is banking a lot of electricity. It looks though in December they were consuming more and not producing as much, and it went up to 0, and then down again into the summertime, and recently, this December, this year, it's been going back up. I was asked why it was going up, and they said, well, our kids are getting older, they're using a lot more electricity, so something to be aware of. So the average home in Massachusetts uses about 7,600 kilowatt hours per year. One way to think about that is if you have 10 100-watt light bulbs working for an hour, that would be the same as a 1 kilowatt hour. So this is the average in the state. Usually when you're going solar or you're looking into it, an installer will ask you for your electricity bill to see what your consumption is on an annual basis. In Massachusetts, the average size of a solar PV system is about 5,000 watts or 5 kilowatts. And we have down here a kind of a back of the envelope calculation. About a 1 kilowatt system is the same, or will produce about 1,200 kilowatt hours per year. So looking at the average home in Massachusetts, a 5,000 watt system would cover about 80% of someone's load. But it's different for every person. So what makes a good site for solar PV? Southern exposure is ideal. A roof that is pointed southwest and southeast can also work, but the closer south that it can be, the better. Panels that are angled towards latitude, which is between 30 to 45 degrees, we're at 43 degrees here in Massachusetts, but anything in that range is excellent. Generally with flat roofs, the panels are angled upwards to get to around 40, 45 degrees. They need around 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight. They need direct sunlight to work. Shading will actually have a very negative effect on the panels. You will also need open roof space. So for a 1 kilowatt size system, that would need about 100 square feet of roof space. So if you wanted a 5 kilowatt size system, you'd need 500 square feet of space. Also, we see sometimes people want to go with a ground mounted or a pole mounted system instead of a roof mounted system. That's also an option. Site feasibility. In Massachusetts, we find that there's a number of sites that are feasible for solar, and there's some sites that are not feasible for solar. Usually what an installer will do will be to do an online analysis to see if you have a good site, and I'll talk to you over the phone. This is actually an image of a shading analysis. This is something that the installer will bring to the site, and it's a fisheye lens that you bring to the roof, and it takes an image picture of all the trees in the area. And what you can see here is May, April, March, February, January, December, as you go up, and then you have from early morning until later in the afternoon. So from this picture, you can see all the way to the right that they have shading in the late afternoon, and that's when the panels will not be working at that time, at that location on the roof. So we took some pictures from online to just take a quick look at, some solar sites. Looking at the first one, that is pretty much an east-west facing roof, and it has a lot of trees shading it. That initially would not be a good site for solar. They might want to take some trees down if they want, but we're not a huge advocate of taking down tons of trees. If there's an old tree or something that needs to be taken down, that's fine, but we're not a huge advocate of taking down trees for the sake of solar. Also, the second image is potentially could be a good site. There's a lot of dormers there that are breaking up the roof. Potentially on the back side there could be some more space. The picture number 3 could be a good site. It's facing south. There are some trees to the left of the house though, so an installer would need to take a sun eye image of that or a pathfinder image to be able to find out if it was a good site. Image number 4 actually shows the home there to the lower right is shaded with some large oak trees, but if you look all the way to the left, there's 2 ground-mounted systems that were run over from the left. And lastly is actually a picture of a site in Harvard, Massachusetts that came under our Solarize Mass Harvard program in 2011. They were actually that's actually a barn, and they fit a 30 kilowatt system on that, but that's pretty much due south-facing with very little shading, so that's kind of an ideal site. With Solarize Massachusetts, installers, they bid base pricing, and Elizabeth Kennedy will actually go into this in a lot more detail in just a few minutes. but there are situations where a site will require what are called cost adders. And what this means is that there might be specific situations in which your home would be required to pay something extra. For example, a ground-mounted system, trenching, all of these things are part of what the installer bids so that there's no specific surprises when you're asking about what adders are. In 2012, we worked with 17 different communities, and we did watch to see what adders were coming up. These are some of the common adders that we saw. We had about 40% of systems have adders associated with them. I have that backwards. I think it was more than that, but 40% of them were optional, which meant there were panel upgrades or monitoring, and on average that added about 10% to the cost. I should put that on the slide so I can be more specific with it. Come to this installer interview night or the installer, and then I'll have it exact. There will be situations where a site isn't feasible. For people who don't have a feasible site, we absolutely recommend getting an energy efficiency audit. These are free from the utility. You would just call Mass Save. We really consider energy efficiency the low-hanging fruit. If you can cut your consumption by 10 or 20%, that's so much less of a system that you have to buy, and that is very, very cost effective. If you aren't able to go solar, you might consider solar hot water as an option. That's a little bit more forgiving than solar PV when it comes to shading and sun. Another option potentially is community solar gardens. We see some of those starting to arise in the state, and that's very exciting. Also, we really need your help to spread the word about this program in Brookline, because there are so many people here. We need your help in really reaching out and making this a community effort. So please spread the word, and thank you very much. I think then I'm going to actually turn it over to my colleague and my boss, Elizabeth Kennedy.
Thank you very much. Hopefully the microphone will keep working. So I appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Solarize Mass program is, now that you know a little bit about the technology and why the town was real, all these great volunteers and folks were interested in bringing you this opportunity. So as you can see from some of the prior slides, there's a great amount of interest in solar PV in Massachusetts, but on those of us on the solar team at the Clean Energy Center, we see these projects spread all across Massachusetts, and we really wanted to take a step back and see how we could, on a very local level, increase the education around the technology, and also bring some economies of scale to installers that were out selling to multiple residential customers. And we wanted to see if we could reduce the complexity for someone who was interested in looking at solar for their property, and really sort of expedite the amount of time it took to go through that decision-making process. So with that, we piloted the Solarize Mass program in 2011 with 4 communities, and then in 2012 we worked with 17 communities. And so currently we are now working with 10 communities across Massachusetts this year. So the way the program really works on a high level is, we, the Clean Energy Center works with various different communities, and through a competitive pricing structure that an installer is bringing to this program, along with a very, very helpful and significant grassroots marketing and outreach effort within Brookline, that allows for the installer to experience sort of reduced marketing and acquisition costs, what we refer to as some soft costs. And in turn, the installer is able to offer customers under this program a very competitive price relative to what we see in the marketplace in Massachusetts. So all of that is really aimed to simplify the process and
make solar even more attractive to homeowners and business owners than we currently see. So as I mentioned, this year we're actually going to do 2 rounds of the program. We're working with 10 communities right now. We are actually in the process of wrapping up the installer selection process, so we will be announcing the installer very, very soon. And you'll be hearing about that. They will be at a Meet Your Installer Night, which we'll probably have in the next couple of weeks, where you can ask sort of specific questions about pricing and what they would be able to do. But the way the program works is the installer is offering what we refer to as tier pricing. So as more people in the community contract for solar, then the price, you'll hit higher tiers, and the price will reduce for everyone in the program. So it's really this group purchasing model. So it helps to encourage people spreading the word about the program, because even if you don't have a feasible site, other people might benefit from additional signups. So the program is going to run through September 30th, and that will be the deadline to sign a contract. It's not for the actual installation, but it will be to sign a contract with the installer. So in terms of sort of how this public-private partnership works, Mass CEC and our counterparts in the state, the Department of Energy Resources, we run sort of the logistics of the program. We are helping to competitively select the installer to work with Brookline, and we've gone through a very rigorous process. We have also brought on some solar technical consultants to help with the technical evaluation, so the equipment, the pricing, the contracts, things like that. We're also providing some marketing and outreach assistance. And then in addition, we are providing rebates to customers under this program. And the rebates are equivalent to the rebates that we offer under our existing a rebate program. The benefit of coming through Solarize Mass is sort of that reduced cost stack. By reducing the marketing and acquisition costs, we're able to, the installer is able to offer sort of a discounted price for solar. The community, it's really sort of up to the community volunteers to help spread the word. They're involved in the installer selection process, and then they're doing sort of marketing and outreach and trying to get as many people to sign up for a free site assessment with the installer. And then the installer is going to provide a full turnkey service. So everything from doing the site assessment to see if you have a feasible site, and then if you do and you decide to move forward, it's all of the permitting, it's the design, all of the installation work, working to get you a rebate through our program. So the idea is that they're handling everything for you. So you as a homeowner or business owner, all you really need to do is sign up for a free assessment. So if you haven't already, there are sign-up sheets at the front. Your contact information will be provided to the installer once they come on board, and once they sort of ramp up, they will reach out to you and let you know whether or not they think you have a feasible site and if you would be interested in moving forward or not. So the Solarize Mass program has been very successful, and we're quite pleased with it. In 2012, the program on average resulted in a 20% price reduction for customers that purchased a solar project relative to all of those people that were purchasing solar across the state of Massachusetts. So the group purchasing model does definitely work. And each of the 17 communities that participated in the program, they resulted in more than a doubling of the number of residential scale solar installations, which is a dramatic increase in the adoption rate. From 2011 to 2012, sort of as a function of population, we saw an adoption rate of an 18x in all of the communities that participated last year in Solarize,
relative to really a 1 to 2 times increase that we saw in the state market. So what we're finding is really through education and this grassroots effort, you can increase the adoption of solar dramatically. And looking at the chart on the right, what I really want to highlight is the number of leads generated. In those 17 communities, we had more than 5,400 people express interest in learning more about solar. Obviously, not all of them ended up moving forward, and they didn't necessarily have a feasible site, but there were enough people out there that said, yes, this is something that I'm interested in learning more about. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit now that you know why we're here, and talk a bit about the incentives that are available for residential scale solar, and just what the economics would look like for a homeowner. And I do just want to sort of put the caveat that I'm going to speak about sort of residential scale installations. If you have questions about commercial systems, I'd be happy to answer them at the end as well. So there are a number of different incentives for a residential project, and I will be the first to admit that it's very complex, and that's where the Mass CEC and your local solar coach and the installer are all here to help walk you through that process. But on a very high level, there are tax incentives. So there's a 30% federal tax incentive on the full installation cost of the system. And there is up to a $1,000 Massachusetts income tax credit if you're doing an installation on your home. There are also rebates available through the Clean Energy Center, which I'll talk about in just a couple of minutes. There's the benefit of net metering, which Elizabeth has already mentioned a little bit. And then probably the most complicated incentive to explain is called the SREC program, which stands for Solar Renewable Energy Certificates, which is an additional income stream that you get when you install solar in the state. And then the other, it's not really an incentive, but the other thing that we want to highlight is what we call sort of the low or no money down option. It's third-party ownership. So every installer, or the installer that will be working with the town of Brookline is offering at least two different options. One option is if you were interested in purchasing the system outright. The other option is if you don't want to purchase the system, a third-party company would own the system and then sell you the power at a reduced rate than what you're paying to the utility today. So there, and that option usually requires little to no money down. So there are multiple options to fit sort of your needs. I think we've talked about net metering a lot already, so I won't spend too much time on it. But as Elizabeth mentioned, net metering is the idea that if you're producing more electricity at any given moment than you're using, that excess generation goes back onto the grid. And the utility is physically giving you a credit, a dollar credit for that generation. And so the idea, at the end of the month, the utility will true up and they'll figure out, have you produced more than you've used in this month? And if you have, you get a credit on your bill. And then that credit will roll over from month to month until you've sort of drawn down on it. The one thing I do want to mention, though, is that net metering is really intended for systems that are sized well to meet your usage on site, because the credit, as I mentioned, is a dollar credit, and the utility is not going to ever cut you a check. So you don't want to oversize a system so that you're just constantly building a credit and you never have any way of monetizing it. So that's why the installer will work with you to figure out, let's size a system that will meet your current demand right now, or maybe if you're looking to increase your demand at some point in the future, if you're an electric vehicle charging station or something like that, they want to work with you to figure out what size works. I just have an example. I don't even think we really, probably going to take this slide out in the future, but of how net metering would work. If you installed a 5 kilowatt system and let's say in July the system produces 800 kilowatt hours, but you only use 600 kilowatt hours, the utility is going to give you a credit for that, the net difference, that 200 kilowatt hours. But then maybe in the winter, when the sun's lower in the sky, you're not going to be producing as much. Your system might only produce 150 kilowatt hours. Your usage is still the same. Let's say it's still that 600. Well, you're going to have to pay for the difference. You're going to have to pay for that 450 kilowatt hours in excess that you used. So these solar renewable energy certificates, what are they? The renewable energy certificate is really a way to distinguish between electrons that are produced by renewable energy sources and the electrons that are produced from, fossil fuels. And so in Massachusetts, the state created, basically mandated that the utilities had a certain percentage of their electricity come from renewable energy. And so on top of that, they said, and we really want a subset of that to come specifically from solar projects. And so the utilities usually are not in the business of installing and owning, a whole bunch of renewable energy projects. So one way that they meet their annual obligations from the state is by purchasing these solar renewable energy certificates. So there's a market in Massachusetts for anyone that owns a solar project to sell these SRECs that the system generates. And it's completely separate from the actual electrons that you're using. It's the green attribute associated with those electrons. And so when your system gets installed and it starts producing electricity, for every 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity that your system produces, you produce one SREC. So an average 5 kilowatt system will produce roughly 5 to 6 SRECs per year. And so the installer will introduce you and give you some options, but introduce you to what we call an SREC aggregator or a broker, and that company will help you to sell your SRECs either on the spot market or through a contract. But the idea is that it's an additional income that you get for installing solar.
What are they worth?
Excellent question. So it is a market. So the value of the SRECs can vary depending on whether the market's oversupplied or undersupplied. And so it's very complicated, but the state has established what they call the RPS. It's a clearinghouse. And so every year, if you are unable to sell your SRECs on the spot market, or maybe on the spot market they're selling for lower than you want, you can hold on to those SRECs, and at the end of the year, you can deposit them into this clearinghouse. And there are mechanisms that the state has put in place to incentivize the utilities to buy these SRECs that are put into this clearinghouse. And so the SRECs that are in the clearinghouse should sell for $285 per SREC. And so we're running the first clearinghouse in June because the market's been short for the last couple of years, so people haven't been depositing them. So we're running the first clearinghouse in June, but my economic model that I'll show you in a minute is assuming $285 per SREC. And we know of people who are selling their SRECs for lower than $285. A number of them are doing it, well, they're doing it for multiple reasons. One, they might be signing with an aggregator or a broker that's saying, I'm going to pay you for, the future value of your SRECs, for the next 5 years. So rather than giving you $285, maybe I'm going to give you $200 or $170. But it's getting paid for that up front. Also, some of the larger projects, sort of utility scale projects, are selling for below $285 because they need to make finance payments, so they don't want to wait for the clearinghouse that's once a year. So if you hear about that, there are reasons that people are selling them for less than $285. But in order to sell SRECs A project owner would report production to Mass CEC. We have what's called a production tracking system. So once a month, if you were reporting manually, you could go down, look at your meter, and then you just plug it into a website online. And the Clean Energy Center, we actually track and verify production and help to essentially mint your SRECs that you can then sell. So there are a lot of questions around the SREC program. The current program was designed to qualify up to 400 megawatts of solar in Massachusetts. And we are nearing the end of that program, but no one knows when we will hit that 400 megawatt mark. And so the Clean Energy Center is working very closely with the Department of Energy Resources. They originally developed the regulations around the SREC program, and they are beginning a stakeholder process to design sort of the SRECs 2, what's going to come after the existing SREC program. So we will work with the town of Brookline to let you know sort of where we are in that stakeholder process and to give you any information as we learn it. On an easier to understand subject, as I mentioned, under the Solarize Mass program, we're going to be offering rebates that are equivalent to the rebates we have currently in our Commonwealth Solar 2 program. And the rebates are available for projects 15 kilowatts and smaller, and the rebates capped on the first 5 kilowatts of the system. And the rebate's what we call a dollar per watt incentive. So there's a base incentive of 40 cents per watt. So if you did a 5 kilowatt system, that's 5,000 watts. 5,000 times 40 cents, you're looking at a $2,000 rebate. So there's the base incentive, and then there are what we call adders. So if any of the equipment on the project is manufactured in Massachusetts, we have a 5-cent adder. We also have a moderate home value adder or a moderate income adder. It's an either or, but you could potentially qualify for that, and it's an additional 40 cents per watt. And then hopefully no one qualifies for this, but we also have what's called the natural disaster relief adder. So if there has been some weather-related incident, and you have sort of FEMA or MEMA documentation related to that, we want to encourage people to rebuild green and consider solar in that process. So our rebates are relatively small. They typically range from $2,000 to $4,000. They represent about 7% of the installed cost, but they definitely help the economics. This is just the criteria for the moderate home value adder. It's based on the total property value, so it's both building and land. It's on your property assessment. And then the moderate income adder is just based on your income, whether you live alone or if there are others in your home, then you would look at the domestic threshold. So one thing for installers that are participating in this program, we wanted to make sure that they met certain requirements and passed certain thresholds. So all of the equipment that's being bid under this program must meet certain minimum technical requirements. So all the equipment has to be certified, has to be UL listed, has to be on the California Energy Commission's list of approved equipment. And they also have to have minimum warranties. So the panels need to have at least a 20-year production warranty. The inverters need to have at least a 10-year warranty. And the installers themselves need to provide at minimum a 5-year workmanship warranty on the full installation of the system. And so these are just minimums. And so we wanted to make sure that there was certain quality control with the installers that are participating in the program. And the systems also need to produce at least 80% of optimal production. And so what this means is we say, well, the perfect system, so the one that's facing due south, that has no shading, at the perfect tilt, that system produces 100% of optimal. It's the optimal system. But then the minute maybe your building isn't quite due south, it's southeast or southwest, and then you have a little bit of tree shading during certain months, that reduces the production. And so we said, in order to qualify for a rebate under this program, a system has to produce at least 80% of what an optimal system would produce. And so I do want to mention, in order to qualify for a rebate, you have to at least produce a minimum amount and be 15 kilowatts or smaller. We have seen systems under Solarize programs before that have been larger, and I know most installers are happy to do sort of larger residential or commercial installations as well. It just means that you wouldn't qualify for a rebate, but we've seen projects sort of forego the rebate to still come in under the program. We also don't mandate insurance levels under this program. We used to under our rebate program, and we don't anymore because we realize that everyone sort of has specific needs or wants for minimum insurance levels that they feel an installer should have. And so it's just something to talk with the installer about and make sure that you're comfortable with those limits. And then finally, our lawyers and finance department make us put this up there, so please bear with me. But if you do receive a rebate under if you own the system and you do receive a rebate under our program, we will be providing you with a 1099 for that rebate. We can't provide any tax advice, unfortunately, so but I just don't want there to be any surprises if you get a rebate and then get a 1099 at the end of the year. So we've already talked a little bit about this. As I mentioned, the installer is going to bid a $1 per watt price for someone who's interested in purchasing a system. And then they're also going to offer what we call a power purchase agreement or a lease. And those two options are the sort of third-party financer option. And the main difference between a power purchase agreement and a lease, they're very similar. With a power purchase agreement, you're paying $1 per kilowatt hour, so you're paying per sort of kilowatt hour that the system is producing, whereas a lease is just sort of a typical lease, like you're leasing a car. You pay sort of a fixed monthly payment to get the electricity from the system. We get a lot of questions about which ownership option is better. Do we have a preference? And so we did a little digging in our Solarize program last year at the 17 communities that participated. And this is the breakdown. This is sort of the spread. So the green portions of the bar represent folks who either signed a PPA or a lease, and the blue portions of the bar are the percentage that did direct purchase. And so you could see it's very sort of community specific. Some communities, all they wanted to do was purchase their systems, where others were mostly PPAs or leases. So we are very much agnostic to ownership models. It's sort of up to you and your particular circumstances. So I'm actually going to dive into a sort of sample financial model now. It's a simple ownership model, but before I do that, I wanted to list my assumptions that went into the model, mostly just to give you a sense of what it is that I'm looking at when I look at the economics of a project. We can make these slides available after the presentation, and I know they're being filmed as well, so if you have any questions about this afterwards, I'd be happy to provide it to you. But For this model, I'm assuming that I'm getting a 5 kilowatt system, which is sort of an average residential system. I'm assuming that it has a capacity factor of 13%. You don't have to remember that, but it's just sort of the typical production rate for systems here in Massachusetts. And I'm assuming that the panel production is going to decrease by 1% every year over the next 20 years. And that's usually the rate by which the panels are warranted for, so it's a very conservative take. I tried to be conservative in this model. I'm assuming that currently, as a homeowner, you're paying 14 cents per kilowatt hour to the utility right now, and that price that you're paying to the utility is going to increase by 3% every year. I can guarantee, as you could see in the slide from earlier, the electricity rate is probably not going to increase by 3% every year. It's not going to be a straight line, but we do anticipate that electricity prices are going to increase over the next 20 years. I'm assuming that the system itself is going to last for 20 years. That's a conservative estimate. We know of systems in Massachusetts that have been installed for upwards of 30 years or longer. There's one at the Beverly High School that was installed in the 70s, I think, that's still producing more than 80% of what it was producing the day it was installed. I'm assuming that you're selling your SRECs for $285 per SREC for the next 10 years. And I know I didn't talk about this when we were on the SREC slide, but if your system is installed, you'll be eligible to sell SRECs for the next 10 years. And I'm assuming that your SREC sales, I'm being conservative, but I'm assuming that you're treating that as income so that it's taxable and that you're taxed at a 20% tax rate. And I'm using a discount rate of 7.5%. So I know this is a little overwhelming, so I'll go through it slowly so it makes a little more sense. But if you look at the middle column, I assume that the system cost, I looked at a typical system in Massachusetts, so an average system outside of Brookline, and I said, let's assume it costs $4.85 per watt. So for a 5 kilowatt system, that comes out to a little over $24,000. And then let's assume that you qualify for just the base rebate under our program. So that sort of comes off the upfront cost, and really you're looking at about $22,000 to purchase that system. And then the next year, when you file your taxes, you'll get a 30% federal tax credit. So that's about $6,600. And then you also get the $1,000 Massachusetts income tax credit. So your net after your tax credits is a little over $14,000. And then I said, well, I'm going to be able to sell SRECs for the next 10 years. What's the value of that SREC income to me today? And it's about $7,700. And then I also thought, well, when you purchase a system, you're essentially prepaying for your electricity for the next 20 years. And so what am I saving by prepaying for that electricity today and not having to make future payments to the utility? So the net present value of that is over $9,000. So your net project cost is your positive $2,500, and you're looking at just sort of a simple payback of 7 to 8 years. And then I took a hypothetical. So if you look at the right-hand column, and I said, but let's say rather than it being a $4.85 per watt upfront cost, it's $4 because of this group purchasing. All the economics, they run down exactly the same, but at the end, your net project cost, you're positive $5,500, and you're looking at a simple payback of 5 to 6 years. So this is a conservative take on it, but I think what we're showing is that, one, not only does the model work in terms of, reducing the payback for someone who purchases a system, but the paybacks themselves are much better than they used to be. When I first started working in solar in 2007, homeowners were purchasing systems with 12 to 15-year paybacks. So it's starting to get a little bit closer to an efficiency technology, which is great. So simple payback is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is from a levelized cost perspective. And so comparing what you're paying for your electricity if you purchase a system versus what you would be paying to the utility if you did. So what this chart, what this graph shows is the blue line, it starts at 14 cents. So if you're paying 14 cents to the utility today, and that rate increases by 3% every year over the next 20 years. Again, it's probably not going to be a straight line, but that's sort of just my hypothetical. The red bar at the top represents the levelized cost, so the cost per kilowatt hour of electricity from your solar project if there were no incentives available for solar whatsoever. But then I assume, all right, I get these tax credits, I get a rebate, I can sell SRECs. So when you take advantage of all of the incentives, all of a sudden, by purchasing a system and investing in that electricity up front, it drops your electricity costs down to that green line, which is about 7 or 8 cents. So you are essentially, when you purchase a system, paying 7 or 8 cents for your electricity over the next 20 years relative to what you could have been paying to the utility, which is that blue line. So your savings is sort of the difference between the green line and the blue line.
You're assuming, though, that everything remains perfectly stable, that there's no change in regulations or anything else over the course of time. Try to show me a system that has stayed perfectly stable in any government issue over 10 or 20 years, and I'd be really very interested in seeing that. So the assumptions are not realistic if you look at the changing regulations, changing payments, if there's more systems.
That's a good point. So I am assuming, the tax incentives are definitely going to be around. The federal tax credit is here through at least 2016. And the Massachusetts income tax credit, which is only $1,000, will remain around. The net metering is in place, and you would sign a contract basically with the utility to interconnect your system and be able to net meter. And SRECs, SRECs, there are a lot of questions about that and sort of the regulatory risk around the SREC program. And so I can't stand up here and say that there's no risk. I mean, there's always a little bit of regulatory risk, but when you install a system and get qualified to sell SRECs, the state is qualifying you to be able to sell under the program for the next 10 years. So, and then once they hit their cap, the program closes, but if you've come in under that program, the utilities still have an obligation to purchase those SRECs. So they're going to continue buying those SRECs. So this model assumes that you take advantage of all of the incentives, essentially, today, you're able to get in under all of the incentives. And with that, what does that effect have on the cost on a per kilowatt hour basis? So the green line, though, it assumes that you are paying the $24,000 or $25,000 up front in purchasing a system, and that you're not taking a loan out for that. But I said, well, what if you wanted to do a power purchase agreement? You didn't want to purchase the system. So I put in a hypothetical power purchase agreement, strictly just sort of for demonstration purposes, so that the purple line on this chart represents this hypothetical power purchase agreement that maybe you're paying the financing company 11 cents per kilowatt hour rather than the 14 cents that you're paying to the utility currently, so that you're saving a little bit on your electricity bill from day one. Usually those contracts have some sort of escalator, so I assumed that there was a 2% escalator in my contract price with this financing company. So my payments go up over time, but it's a known increase. It's something that you can budget for. And the idea is that you're still saving money relative to what you would be paying to the utility over the 20-year term of the contract. And then I ran all the same numbers again, but then I assumed rather than if you were purchasing the system and you had the capital available, rather than that, then you went to the bank and you took out a loan. And so if you're taking out a loan for the $25,000 and it's a 10-year loan at a 5% interest rate, and you're sort of making the routine payments on that loan, well, all of a sudden the green line that was 7 or 8 cents now actually bumps up to about 15 cents. And so the reason I put this up there, again, we're not, we are agnostic. We don't have a preference to one model over the other. But the idea is that if you are going to have to finance a project, that's a really good time to start thinking about which model might be better for you. And the installer will be able to walk through their specific offering, and you can decide if you want to take out a loan, get a home equity loan, something like that, or if you wanted to do a power purchase agreement. So with that, we're pretty much wrapping up, and we'll open up to questions in a moment. But as I mentioned, if you haven't already, please sign up for a free site assessment. And if you're interested in helping to volunteer at any point under the program or help spread the word, I know Werner would probably appreciate some assistance. And we're actually really very much wrapping up the installer selection process now. Once the installer comes on board, they're going to need sort of a week or two to sort of get their legs under them and get the program rolling. But they will likely contact you in the next couple of weeks once everything's set up. And we're huge proponents of energy efficiency and other technologies, even outside of solar. So consider, if you haven't already, getting an energy efficiency audit. One of our colleagues and also a Brookline resident, Amanda Treat, is sitting at the table in the back. She manages our solar hot water program. So if you find that solar PV isn't a feasible option, or you're interested in doing both, there's also a rebate program available for hot water. And with that, thank you very much. We're here to answer any questions, and I saw some hands go up. Yeah.
Question: if you lease and you sell the house, what happens?
That is a great question. Usually there's an option to transfer that lease to the new homeowner. So generally, to qualify for a power purchase agreement or a lease, there's some credit requirement, and usually if someone can qualify to purchase a house, they meet the requirement to take on that lease or power purchase agreement. So the idea would be that you would just transfer the benefit of this contract on to the new homeowner. There is probably some clause where you can terminate the lease. There will likely be some financial penalty associated with that, but it's a question that every installer will be prepared to answer. Yep.
Do the SRECs transfer to a new owner as well? In other words, if someone comes to buy a house and they say, "What's that on the roof?" Can you explain it?
Sure. So yes, I believe the SRECs, if you sold the house before 10 years was up, then your ownership would transfer to the new homeowner.
And one other question they asked us, because they were so critical to the payback.
Sure.
We had someone come out and give us an estimate. And they pressured us to do this before June, they said, because the SREC price will change, the system changes. They couldn't tell us exactly what that meant, and I can see now, there's a lot of complexity. It's not entirely their fault, but is something happening in June that affects the
Yes, so there are a lot of moving parts right now, and it is confusing, so I'm not surprised that there was some angst and confusion around this. So the Mass Department of Energy Resources that writes the regulations for the SREC program, they currently are getting modifications to the regulations that they're in the process of getting them promulgated. But one of the changes that they will be making, their goal is to keep that period by which you can sell your SRECs, to keep it fixed at 10 years. The way the current regs read is that if the market becomes oversupplied for new systems that come online, the amount of time that you can sell your SRECs would drop from 10 years to 8 years. So the reason they were probably saying that was because they might not have been aware of this regulatory process that was going on, and they wanted people to get in under the 10-year period. But DOER is working to address that issue for that exact reason, and that they have installers out there trying to sell to people who aren't ready yet, just to get in because they think that the program, the number of years for which you can sell is going to go down.
This is a question that goes beyond, I think, the nuts and bolts of installing systems in Brookline. It's a bigger picture question. As you pointed out, with the net metering, a homeowner cannot do anything more than get credit for excess electricity generated. They can't turn it into cash. So there's no incentive to install a system that does anything more than more or less meet your electrical needs. Why not enable the homeowner to sell the surplus energy, surplus electricity generated back to the utility? That would change the whole system so that there'd be an incentive to install solar power on a maximum basis. If you've got a big barn that faces south, you put in a lot of panels instead of just barely enough. Why can't we enable homeowners to actually sell what they're producing to the utilities? Why are the utilities protected? And could this ever change so that we get beyond the really complicated incentives to the basic market incentives?
Yeah, there are scenarios where you can oversize a system. So, there's an incentive called virtual net metering, and I don't talk about it much because we don't see it frequently on the residential side. But let's say you have that great. I'm going to use the barn as an example. Let's say you have this barn, it's perfect orientation, you don't have that much demand on site. You can put a system on that barn and do what's called virtual net metering. You can virtually transfer credits from your utility account to another utility account within certain parameters within the utility. So what this enables is you to put up a larger system and then spread the credits over multiple accounts. And this is what we see a lot on the municipal level. So let's say you're a community, you have a landfill, you want to put a large landfill project on, a large solar project on the landfill. Well, usually the municipality doesn't have a lot of electricity demand on site. And what they're doing is they're virtually net metering those electric credits to their town hall, the public school, the library. So there are ways there are ways to do that. The challenge, and this goes back to the fact that it's always going to be a credit and not the utility cutting a check, is that if you are an individual
producing in excess of what you're using, you're going to have to sign a bilateral contract with someone to sell those excess credits. So it's just contractually more complicated, but there are ways around it. Why it was structured like that, it was probably a give and take between the state and the utilities. Net metering is not an insignificant amount of work for the utilities, virtual net metering in particular, so it was sort of the happy medium that they could come up with. But I'm happy to talk about virtual net metering more with you offline.
Could you say something about condo associations? We have a small condo association, 4 units. Can we qualify in an arrangement like this?
This is my great uncle, by the way.
What are they?
I haven't seen him in a while. So that's a good question. And I know that there are a lot of condos in Brookline. So condos may be feasible. They're a little complex, and partly it's how the incentives are structured. So a condo association itself could potentially do a project to offset if you have common area load, for example. The problem is most of the time condo associations don't have any tax appetite because they're not for-profit entities. So it makes it hard for them to take advantage of tax credits. So you may see condos do a power purchase agreement or a lease. For individual unit owners, it's not. It could be possible. It depends on sort of roof rights, and it can get a little complicated with legal documents. We've seen some condos do solar, and it's something to talk to the installer about because it will depend specifically on the condo association. But I'm not going to lie, they're very complex, and we haven't seen too many of them.
So I have a follow-up question to your great uncle's question. So what if you're the owner of a 2-family house where you live in you own both units, but you live in one and rent out the other,
Yep.
and the 2 units have separate systems?
I would imagine that at this, they would be able to do something with that. If you own the whole building and there are 2 separate meters, they could either hook up part of the system to one meter, part of the system to the other, or you could have the whole system hooked up to one meter and virtually net meter, so assign net metering credits to the other account. So there are ways to work that.
We looked into and passed a solar installation on our roof, and we're told that because it's slate, it couldn't be done. Is that still the case?
I'm actually looking, so your installer is in this room right now. You guys can wave.
Could you repeat the question?
So the question was, can systems be mounted on slate roofs? And I think it's possible.
It's possible. There's a cost to it, but then I've also run into situations where the company that installed and maintained the slate roof didn't like the idea of solar being installed on it, so it became the homeowner's choice to, in that case, not go forward, because my understanding is with slate roofs, there's some maintenance that goes on, where they have to go up and move and adjust some of the slates. But not everybody feels the same way, so it's kind of a homeowner's choice.
Can I just make a comment relative to that? I think I was partly invited because I was a homeowner that has a slate roof. We have solar on our slate roof. You can come see this around.
Who adjusts their speeds?
Well, there is us. So, honestly, I never really thought about it. Slate roofs don't require a whole lot of maintenance. The truth
not
is-
at all.
So,
We've never.
I don't know, I guess you could move the panel out of the way if there was a problem. But the truth is, it doesn't require much maintenance. And the way I look at it is the solar panel is kind of like a roof that's partly protecting the slate. So the answer is yes, you can do it, yes, we've done it.
I think, if I may add something here, I'm pleased it's turned into discussion a little bit, because both the issue of condos and slate roof is something that we've talked to people at CEC about, which makes Brookline really different from a lot of communities, certainly communities in Central Mass and such. And we actually have a number of people, I'm glad that Rob spoke up. We have Blake is, not Blake, but who's our other person here from the condo? David has been working on it in a condo setting. These are issues that we really hope to work through in Brookline, and we hope anybody here that is in a larger size condo or a slate roof or whatever will stay in touch with us. And if we get, enough people talking about it, thinking about it, we will solve those problems, and we'll pass the learning along as we go.
Sure, so the question was, when would actual installations begin? So the program is designed for the installer very much to focus on doing outreach and contracting during the first couple of months of the program, because it really benefits everyone through this group purchasing model. But installers will have a year to do the actual installation. So the installation work would start, likely in the fall, and then depending on the winter, could go into the spring. So, yep, in the white.
Hi, actually 3 questions. Can everybody in town decides to do this as your installer, going to be able to handle the volume? That's question number 1. If I have real estate in another town and both houses are solar possible, can I do the other house at the same time under the Brookline program and get into the Brookline pricing and help the Brookline pricing? And number 3, nobody ever mentioned anything about the roof other than the slate question, but if your roof is a certain age, 15, 20 years old, do you see people replacing roofs before they do this? And what happens if you don't replace the roof, you put this on it and you think you need roofing? So the last question is the longest one.
Sorry, what was your first question?
Can your installer handle the volume?
Oh, the volume, yes. So Solar Flare is the installer that was selected to work with the town of Brookline. And Solar Flare actually worked with 3 of the 17 communities last year. So we feel very confident that they can handle the volume this year. And having gone through the program already, we feel like they have a good sense of expectations.
I would assume that would be the answer.
Yep. The second question
Real estate in another town.
about that's a question to ask Solar Flare. I'm sure they would be happy to help you with that. And so you could talk to them about pricing and how that would fall in. It wouldn't count towards the tier pricing, the contracted capacity within Brookline, but I'm sure they'd be happy to work with you. And then the last question was on the roof. Each installer has their own rule of thumb, so I will let them sort of answer that question directly. But usually, if you need to if you're planning on replacing your roof in probably the next 5 to 7 years, they recommend replacing your roof first before the system goes up.
I think.
You would think.
So I assume, since you didn't mention it, that solar is not eligible for the 0 interest loans?
The heat loan, right. So in Massachusetts, there's, through Mass Save, there's a 0 interest heat loan. You can qualify for the heat loan for solar hot water. So talk to Amanda, but unfortunately, it's not for solar PV.
The unit pricing that will get to be established as part of your selection process or negotiation process. That would take care of all the hardware itself, the unit pricing and the difficulty of putting it on the house as well. And then any of the other features would be an additional cost. Those are the adders.
Correct.
So there's going to be a unit pricing established for the per kilowatt installation, and then all the others will be extra. Is that correct?
Correct. So we had installers bid what we call base pricing. So that's sort of all in
materials, labor, permitting for sort of an ideal system. So that's the base price. But they recognize when they go out to do a site assessment, sometimes there's an electrical panel upgrade, or sometimes you have to reinforce, you have to do structural reinforcements and things like that. So there are very site-specific adders that could apply to a building, and so we had installers bid these adders. So what their adders would be and what the pricing is associated with that, because we don't want there to be anyone that sort of perceives it as a bait and switch, like, oh, they said this, but they came out and they changed the price. So
you got unit pricing for the adders.
exactly. So everything, they have bid all of their pricing, and it's in their proposal, so it's already been established, and that was one of the sort of selection criteria when we were evaluating them. So they'll be able to say exactly what it should cost for different, mandatory, some, or optional adders, if you were to go forward.
Have there been any installations that like you're describing in historic preservation districts?
Yes. Yes, so sometimes there's someone from the historic preservation district that shows up. The question was, can installations happen in historic districts?
Definitely. Sure, I work closely with the preservation staff in the town of Brookline. The local historic district, there's actually renewable energy guidelines for local historic districts. On the back table copies, they've actually, a few solar installations have already been installed in local historic districts. You do need to work with the Preservation Commission to get review and approval of the system before it's installed. And they have some specific ways that they want it to look. They want you to say if you have a slate roof, they aren't really interested in you modifying the slate roof, things like that. But they can definitely happen, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with whoever.
All right, I think maybe we could take one or two more questions, and then I'll stay after.
In summer, I live in Columbia County, New York, and that's also near Tanglewood. And I heard already last year that Lennox was one of the communities. And in Columbia County, it's very rural, and we've seen fields of the solar panels, so now I know what they mean. But I had a question about how many people, how is Lennox going, and how many people or percentage of Brookline residents does it take to make this a viable program?
Well, I would say, having looked at the pricing that is being offered under the program, the first person that signs up, even if no one else signed up, would be doing much better than what we're seeing in the market currently. So the installer bid very competitive pricing, and so I think I could go back to one of the slides. The chart represents tier pricing, and so the first tier is from 1 to 25 kilowatts. And so if you think of a typical system being 5 kilowatts, it will only take five contracts to move into tier 2, and then you'll experience sort of a price reduction. And so the price under the program isn't established until the end of the program. So everyone would get the same deal. I would say 10 out of the 13. So last year we had 17 communities, but there were sort of 13 individual or groups of communities. 10 of the 13 communities or groups hit tier 5 last year. So I have full confidence that Brookline will get to tier 5.
So, great.
I'm going to step in here just because to say it is getting late and the crowd's getting a little smaller, which is a good thing because anybody that has a tag on is going to stay around and answer questions. I want to mention two things. First of all, I can thank the town and town government for really helping us do this, and I think it's a great thing for the community. Kara Bruton is standing in the back up here after another meeting. She's the acting planning director, saying it sort of I'm very proud of the community where we really town government helps get involved and do things like this for the community. So thank you for being here, Karen, and for supporting it. The other thing I'd say is everybody should be sure to sign up if you get an assessment, if you're all interested. But the other thing we're also looking for people to help us spread the word. So we have a separate list back there. Anybody that would be interested in getting involved in any way, whether it's spreading the word in their own community, helping us sit at a table somewhere, doing some canvassing or something. If you have any interest, please sign up on your way out. And say, we will stay around. Please don't leave until you have all your questions answered. Thank you very much.